We're gonna go ahead and start. I hope that I put. Oh, I didn't. Man, okay. So, so today is we're gonna look at duty to warn, suicide assessment and follow up 5150, 5250, and the patient's rights advocacy law and regulations. So actually go on their website and look at the laws and regulations. So, before we start, have any of you guys ever had someone that wanted to kill themselves or other people? What are some good pointers? Because usually people are absolutely terrified if someone mentions killing themselves or others. And you don't want to be terrified because it's going to happen all the time. Where people are just going to, I should just die. Or they might even tell you that you should just die. And you'll be like, I've been wishing, but it hasn't happened. What are some good pointers for people? Because I know the first time I've taken people on like 5150s or that happens, they're just freaked out. And it's normal, but it's not always helpful. So people that have, what was your experience like when someone wanted to kill themselves or others?
Mine was after I was fired so the guy I was, this was when I was in the military, I just kind of talked to him and just asked him to open up and let me know what was going on before it was so bad in his life that he was thinking about doing that. He started opening up, and I kind of sympathized, like, oh man, I understand, yeah, I see how that can be. But like, about children and my kids, how will they feel, in the long term, it will affect them, not just in the moment, but long term. And then I was able to talk to the chaplain, and then the chaplain
helped with it. So we'll go. I mean, this won't be on the slides, but we'll talk about some scenarios and then what we need to do professionally to meet our mandates, and then some potential ways of approaching someone wanting to hurt themselves or others. Have anyone ever had someone that was suicidal or homicidal that was playing some games? Like they were like MVP. They were like not giving you the right stuff. They're playing games. You guys will have that, where you have someone that's like, I might want to kill myself. And they usually have a little smirk, and you're like, okay, what are you going to do? Not going to tell you. Have you guys ever had someone like that? So we'll talk about that, because that's important.
I was going to say, at the BMC, we have a lot of homeless people who'll be like, well, it'll be like 4 days before the first of the month, and they'll be like, well, if I leave right now, I'll kill myself, but if I stay for 4 days, I'll be fine. And it's like,
So you have to be careful too. So this is where the tricky part comes with danger to self and others. Obviously, your agencies are going to have their own protocol, but you are still liable. You have to take whatever someone says as serious. If the agency decides no, that's fine, but you want to document your attempts in case they go and kill themselves. Because what happens with mainly borderline is they accidentally kill themselves. So they've been threatening to kill themselves for the last 15 years. And one day they just take a little bit too much Benadryl or they cut a little too deep and then they die. And what it will look like, so you might say, well, I've been working with them and they're always saying this. But from an outsider's perspective, they're going to be like, they clearly indicated blah, 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 blah. And you didn't do anything. And that's not a justified reason, is that they always do this. If anything, for someone that's not a therapist or social worker, they're going to be like, that makes it even more scary. Why didn't you take this seriously? Because you get dead inside as a social worker after a while. Things they're not a big deal. Like, people are like, oh, I'm going to do it now. And you're like, okay, well, let me ask you a few questions before you do it now. So you just get where it's more normal. And so you want to, we'll talk a little bit about what you need to protect yourself, and then also the fact that depending on what people give you in terms of information, you have to just go off the information provided. If something happens, I'll explain that a little bit more as we go through, but you have to kind of be able to let go. You know what you need to do, and you know your limitations. Because there's been people The ones that never say they're going to kill themselves, those are the scarier ones. Because when they do, it's like super serious. And you know, like if you work with someone long enough, you have a feeling like, oh, stuff's not okay. Like you're like, how are you? Oh, just great. And you're like, oh, that is not the kind of grade I want. Do you have any thoughts of hurting yourself? And they think for a while. Nope, none at all. Okay. And this is someone that doesn't normally ever talk about that. That's when it gets scary. But ultimately, if they don't give you that information, you can't put someone on involuntary hold because your gut tells you to. And so you have to be okay with that. That you do what you can. And then if someone makes decisions and you've done what you could, then that's what happens. But we'll talk about that as we go through. And we'll talk about suicide assessment. Honestly, should be happening a little bit like all the time. I wouldn't like you're not going to necessarily ask someone unless they're high risk. So I've had high risk people that have had lots of hospitalizations, lots of suicide attempts, and so I just let them know when we start. Part of my normal session with you is to ask you, are you going to kill yourself or others? Because I want to be able to check on my note that I did assess that due to the risk issue. There's not necessarily a safety issue because they're not saying they want to, unless they say they want to, but there's a risk because there's a long history. So the first thing, and I didn't put it in this slide, so I'll just talk about it, because I noticed on the syllabus we don't really go into it, which is kind of surprising. I had to go back and forth with the syllabus this quarter to get it approved, so I think it was one of the things that got taken out. But one of the things that you need to consider with these situations and working with people in general is self-determination. So that is an ethical issue that you already have probably faced. When you know that what someone's going to do is just not going to work, you can see the train wreck, like you're prepping for it, but they have that right. And then what our requirement is that we still need to provide services. We can't get like butthurt and be like, oh no, I'm not going to do that. If you would do it, like the way that I always check myself is, would I do that for anyone else? And if I would, then I better do it for that client. And if I have any rationale otherwise, say, I'll give you a couple. So when I used to place people that were homeless into shelters when we were trying, there's some that were really difficult. So they would go through shelters every day. Oh, I don't like that one. So what could happen and what people would do, so I had one in particular that literally I drove him like 3 hours away because he had been through all of them. But everyone else was like, well, you should just tell them there is no more. But technically there is, and I want to exhaust everything. There's a couple reasons. One, because if this was my favorite client, I would totally do it for them. And that's not okay to give different treatment to different people. The other piece is that for that client in particular, when there was nothing left, they couldn't blame me. And they blame me for almost everything, but when it came to a point where there was absolutely nothing in the region, there was no grounds for it's you didn't try hard enough. He knew that I was driving to where they filmed Hills Have Eyes and dropping him off there. So that's one of the pieces is sometimes when you're working with people, so sometimes people think, oh, if I do case management, I'm not doing clinical. You totally are. Everything's clinical. So in the process of doing that case management, I'm helping them hopefully get to a point where they realize it is me. Like I'm the problem. Everywhere I go, it doesn't last. But I'm doing case management. Like I remember in that position, people that were MFTs were like, we don't do real therapy. I was like, oh, I do. But they had this different view. It needed to be like, you lay on the couch. And like, they got bed bugs. Do you want them on your couch? I don't know. And then we talk about your mom or whatever. But like, even connecting people to services, their maladaptive patterns are going to come up. And then you can address it while still, I think it's actually more effective. Because how many people do you know that go through therapy and talk about all their problems and nothing changes? They still have the same problems, but when it's something more interactive, where you're actually connecting them, you're building that relationship, sometimes you have more of a possibility to help them. Other things could be, like, for that, one of the things that my coworkers would do a lot is if someone was really difficult, mainly because they weren't on medication or they were using drugs, they would justify, I'm not going to place them anywhere else because once they get clean, there will be nowhere to place them. That's not okay, because if you work with people long enough, you realize that sometimes people never get clean. So I'm going to exhaust everything. And they would use it as, well, I'm trying to protect them. No, you're not. You're just trying to not work. Because you're hoping if you don't give them something that they'll back off and disappear. Other ways could be just not wanting to see someone. So you'll see that a lot, especially if you work with high needs populations. Because whatever people say, everyone has favorites. Because you're human. So you have countertransference with everyone. I don't know if you guys know that. I know sometimes in classes people look at me like, what? Countertransference? We have countertransference all the time. So we have people that we prefer, people that we don't prefer. And so if you are like avoiding someone, avoiding their call, avoiding seeing them, like you see them when you're walking into work and you do like a ninja spiral into the bushes because you don't want them to catch eyes, that's not okay. Like, we need to be able to give people the same amount of services. And one of the things that I found helpful with doing that is it lessens the likelihood that they can blame you. They can blame you, but it has no substance to it. So we get defensive when someone blames us, and we know that there's some truth to it. Because if you know you did everything, why are you defensive? If someone's attacking you, you wouldn't be. You'd be like, I did everything. I don't know what else I can do. But we don't do that. And so then when someone's like, you don't help, you weren't, we get defensive because we didn't do everything we could. You know what I mean? And it's not saying, it's still having good professional boundaries, not, putting yourself out into it, like extending yourself to a point where you can't. But the few times that I've been really upset with someone saying I didn't help them, if I was really honest, I did not want to help them a little bit. And I did avoid certain things a little bit. And so I was more upset that they called me out on it. Then I'm like, how dare you speak the truth? Gosh, get out of here. So with self-determination, it's a good, when you have ethical, if you have a question in an interview about an ethical issue, self-determination is a great go-to. Because that always happens, where people do stuff that you don't agree with. They're stable, they decide, I'm going to go off my meds. Okay, well, the reason you're stable is because you're on meds. Nope, not this time. Okay. They go off of it. You can't then not really want to help them. Like, oh, well, I told you. Like, you did this. Like, I have a lot of things to do. And it's hard because we can convince ourselves that we're not doing that, but I see it all the time, where people are like not giving services to someone because they did the thing that they told them. They knew if you go back with that person, you're going to end up homeless, and then when they end up homeless, they're just like slow to respond. That's not okay. It makes sense human-wise, but you're not a human when you're a social worker. That literally, you're not. You're a social worker. And so you need to like keep that in mind. Things that are acceptable with your friends are not acceptable when you're a social worker. Because you're a different aspect. Same person, different aspect. So yeah, are we human? Totally. But is that a sufficient excuse? Probably not. We can do that with our family and friends, be passive-aggressive, all those things, but not with consumers, because when that's our scope, is to perform certain things. And so that's why we have to address all of our own issues. And that's usually where self-determination gets frustrating for social workers, is they have not addressed their need to control everything. And if you want things to go the way you want them to go, never pick social work. Ever. Like, that's just like mind-boggling. Where it's like, I don't like when things don't go my way. So what kind of sick puppy are you? You picked a field where nothing is going to go your way ever. And you're just like shocked all the time. So you do want to address that too. What gets in the way for me with self-determination? So I'll be honest with you guys, when I've looked at for myself at what gets in the way is I want recognition, not okay. I feel if they're not giving me like, oh, you've tried so hard, not okay with that. That's not okay professionally. That's a human thing, but that's something that I need to address myself. Maybe working harder than them and expecting something back. Everything you do for a client, never expect for them to do it back for you. Just don't expect people ever. That you'll have such a happy life if you can stop, because you don't know like the agreements that we put people in. They don't know, like all the time. So when I see people, let's say if I'm working with a couple well, you said you loved me. Oh, I do love you. But then why'd you do this? So the first problem is nobody defined what love meant. They just assumed their perspective was universal. That's not true. So when you're working with people, you need to be very clear, and you can't expect, if you're going to do something that is either difficult for you, if you're expecting them to in turn be an easier client, you're going to burn out. Like, that's just not, it's just not, and it happens. So pretty recently, usually if I have any kind of emotionality with clients, I process it for myself. Because my emotionality is almost always an indicator that it's my own stuff, and it has nothing to do with them. I make really good arguments of why it is all their fault, and it is all, but I know that it's not true. So it went through with one of my clients. The cognition that I finally came to was that I'm upset that my mentally ill client is acting mentally ill. Had all these good reasons, but that was really what it came down to. Does that make any sense? Why are you working with mentally ill clients then? If you don't want to be with people that are mentally ill, good luck. I'm just saying that in general, but you know what I mean? So you want to look at that as like, what makes me feel like you never want to do stuff that you're then going to resent the client if they're not successful. Because you did A, B, and C. That's not okay. And half the time they never asked you. Like, that's one of the things that I've seen, and I'm talking from personal experience. I'm not necessarily, I'm making judgments too, but I struggle with this as well. How people do stuff that no one asked them to do, and then they resent the other people because they didn't acknowledge it or take it, or that's not okay. Like, they're like, what are you talking about? Well, I did all this for you. Like the guy that I took him up there, if I would then be like, I took you to Thermal. He never asked me. Well, no, he did, because I have a strong social work ethic, and I need to have service, but he never asked you, and you didn't have to do that. So you can't do stuff and then be mad at people for it. That doesn't work. Or go over, because I see that a lot with social workers. They want to go above and beyond, but then they resent the client, their peers, their supervisors. No one else is doing all this. They don't have to. Have you ever had that, a coworker that's like, no one works around here? They're always emotional. It's never like really like, hey, it doesn't seem like everyone works. It's like, no one works. And they're talking to you, so you're like, well, I guess I'm part of no one. That's not okay. That's your own issues. And so if that's the perspective, you're going to burn out because you're not going to be happy with other people. People just need to do the basics. Whatever that looks like. Your clients just need to do the basics. If they remain eligible, they remain eligible. But what happens with people that have kind of that mindset is they do above and beyond, and they feel victimized that no one else does that. And they start to become very angry because it's not fair. Again, if that's happening with clients or even your peers, you need to go to counseling. That's something very like childhood of origin stuff. That's not... Especially when you're really emotionally reactive around it, that has nothing to do with whatever's happening. And that's a good way to gauge when you're working with people in self-determination. If there's a lot coming up for you, it is a good possibility that this has nothing to do with what the client did, or your boss, or your peer, or whatever. It has to do with something that you need to address, because that's part of our values, is we're responsible to monitor ourselves and know when we need to stop, know when we need to get help, those kind of things. So self-determination is hard because you can't control what the people are going to do. So if someone comes in and they say, I feel like I want to hurt somebody else, and you go and you say, okay, so what are you going to, who is it? Well, I don't know. They don't really have a person. Do you have a weapon? No. But they're saying things that you're like, I think you are going to. If they don't give you the right information, you can't do anything about that. And then you have to be, because what I see happens a lot of times is people's reaction to that escalates the situation. They make it way worse because they're like, no, this isn't how it's going to go. You're going to tell me what I want. Don't be a social worker, because no one's going to tell you what you want, ever. You have almost no control. All you're doing is just getting what you can and then trying to help them. So self-determination, really important. Obviously, if it reaches where they have a plan and means, then we intervene. We don't just say, okay, well, you have the right to self-determination. If we have grounds, then we look at involuntary hospitalization. But if we don't, we respect their right to self-determination. And of course, consult, because sometimes you might consult with the supervisor and they say, ask this and you ask that, and it addresses the issue, but there'll be a lot of gray, especially people that use hospitalizations as a way to punish you, like you're in trouble. You'll see that a lot, where it's like, look what you did. Last I remembered, I didn't, molest you for 10 years and then severely abuse you for 15. I just been working with you for 1 month. I don't know how I did that, but okay. You know what I mean? Like, but people will do, you did this. And then you feel like, did I do that? No, you didn't. Like, if you did something where you're like, hey, that wasn't very helpful, address it. Otherwise, don't go fall for people's stuff. Because they know when you're a person that will be like, oh, I did do it. Because people that don't care, they're not going to do that with. It's kind of like, I think I've already shared this with you guys, but the clients that I had, that when I inherited them, they're a nightmare. They'll just walk out of session saying, I have razor blades, and then leave. So you don't have time to be like, what are you going to do with them? Like, are you going to shave your legs because it's date night? Are you going to, like, carve into your veins because you're dead night? Like, what's going to happen? So you go... So they would do stuff like that, and what I realized is you don't have to know what to do. So that's the first thing. I think sometimes when people feel like, when this happens, I have to know what to do. You don't, because you can always consult with the supervisor, and you always should. You should never just make decisions on your own. And sometimes when you do that, you're not secure in what you're doing, so it becomes like a power struggle. So one of them always would want to kill themselves Friday at 4:45. Usually it was like 4:55, actually. First week, big overhead page. You got someone in the front, come up. I'm going to kill myself. How are you going to do it? Benadryl. I have a whole bottle. Do you have some? I just bought a bottle. Okay, so there's some means. And you can die if you take a lot of pills, even if it's Benadryl. And razor blades. I also bought a box. I'm like, well, you're really productive for being so, like, disturbed right now. Like, you went to the store. I don't even know where to find razor blades. It's hard to find deodorant. You found Benadryl and razor blades. So, okay. And then they're like, I don't know what I'm going to do then. So, in the past, what the social worker did is they'd get pissed right away. Because you wanted to die all day long. And you picked Friday at 4:45. They personalize it. That's the first thing. And maybe they did. Maybe they literally did. They were like, all day I want to die. And then they were like, oh, now it's time. So they personalize it. Oh, I'm so upset. I have things to do. They show up at 4:45. So they're irritated. So how effective are you going to be when you're irritated with someone that wants to kill themselves? You think they're going to notice? A little bit. When you're like, okay, well, we need to finish this quick. They're like, okay, I'm down. And you're like, no, not like that. Not like that. So then they'd be irritated. Then the person would start escalating. You have to do this as your job. Because that's usually what gets everyone, entitlement. Right? Oh my gosh, I just can't handle this. You go back in, you tell your supervisor. And what can happen if you don't control your reactions is you can make judgments that aren't actually factual, and then something could happen. So you walk in, because I've seen it. Oh, this person's just full of crap. That's how they start explaining the risk and safety factors. Probably not a good indication. You're like a little swayed because you're literally going to see only what you want to see, which is that they're full of crap. And then if they do end up killing themselves, and then someone's like, what about this? You're like, oh, I forgot. Okay. Time for jail. So they get mad, they get escalated, they start threatening. Do not threaten someone that wants to hurt themselves or others. I will give you an example of it's not a threat, but being firm, and in the context of which I've done that before. Don't threaten someone. If someone's saying, I want to kill myself, don't say, well, I'm going to get you 5150'd. Well, that kind of makes sense if they're not going to agree to voluntary hospitalization. I don't know if we need to do like a power. No, you won't. I'll just leave. Then I'll call the cops. Again, you're not building a relationship. You're not going to be able to help the person. And they know when they're pissed and they need to take it out on someone, they know exactly who they're going to go to because you are reactive. If clients keep coming to you certain ones, it's because you react. And that's your problem, not theirs. They just know I'll get what I want out of that person. They'll scream. I'll have a reason to go home and cut. I'll have a reason to be like, no one helps me, whatever the case is. So this person comes, and their real attitude, because they've had all these experiences, they've been conditioned to be like, really like, I come at 4:45, they're pissed, we have this battle, I say I'm going to leave, I don't go home, that's what they told me. If you call the cops, I'm just going to go in the parking lot and do it. So again, power struggle. Don't fall into a power struggle. It happens. It totally does. I mean, there's some clients, especially if you work for a long time, where you just, you're in a power struggle, but you're like, it's just so good. I'm just going to keep going. But don't do that. So the first time that she shows up, I come out. And she's like, looks like you're not going anywhere tonight for Friday. Okay. Luckily, I have no life, so I wasn't going to go anywhere anyways. I'm going to kill myself. Okay, so do you have, a plan? Do you have means? I'm not going to tell you. Okay, so I have to just get what information I can. Some people, if you have the right relationship, I'll tell them. We've been around this, so you know what I mean. You know what I mean? I have to get certain information. We don't need to do all this kind of thing. Well, I have Benadryl. Okay, so are you going to take it? Because maybe you have allergies. I don't know. It is sprouting season, so maybe you're just going to take some Benadryl and sleep tonight. It's a joke. Sometimes I actually do say that to people. No, I'm going to take all of them so that I can die. Okay, so that's worrisome because I don't want you to die. Well, you're going to have to take me then to the hospital. Okay. That is accurate. Right? You could have emotion and, oh, God, I had these plans. If you're a social worker, don't make plans. If you're on call or it's Friday night, make plans for Monday night, because nobody's in crisis Monday night. Or full moon. You just know, full moon, no plans. Because you're going to be a hot mess. They're going to be everyone hot mess. So, okay. Well, you're going to have to waste your time. Well, it's not really a waste of time. I don't want you to be dead. Okay. So, will you go voluntarily? So, there's a few options that you have. Well, I might just run away. Okay, so that's one option. So let's talk about that option. If you run away, then what I would do is I'd follow you till I can't. I'm not gonna, chase you and get in my car. We're gonna have like a car race or something. And then once I can't, then I'll call the police so they can do a welfare check because I don't want you to die. Well, I'm not gonna go back to my house. Okay, so then I can't do anything else then. Like all I can do is call the police. They can do a welfare check. And if you choose to not go home, that's unfortunate because I really don't want you to die. Okay, well, I'm going to do it. Because, someone wants reaction. That's unfortunate. I really like to see you, because now you're pulling on your relationship. I'd really like to see you safe. Don't tell someone, you need to go to the hospital. That's not effective. You're now pulling on your relationship. I'd really like to see you safe. That's what I would like to see. Fuck you, I don't like you. Okay. So then you can go the other options. So the other options are that if you want to go voluntarily, I'll take you and drop you off. And then you can go in and they can evaluate you. You're voluntary, so if you decide to leave, you can do that. You're not on hold. I don't want you to have to be in the most restrictive or like cops are there, you're on a hold, you chained to a wall. Like I'd rather you be able to just go in and say, hey, I need some help. And see if you meet criteria. And then the other option, if you don't want to do any of those but you still actively want to hurt yourself, is to put you on a hold. I can't do that. So you have to have training to do that. So it wouldn't be me, but I would contact the person that could. They would come out. If they decided to put you on hold, we would do that. If you were resistant, we'd call the police, just because we don't have guns and stunners and all that stuff. So you're predicting so they know like what will happen. So it's nothing's like shocking. Like what? The police are here now? Like remember I told you like that's what would happen. And then you can say, what do you want to do? So you're partnering with them. You're giving them options. They have choices. And then you're saying, what is it going to be your choice? Because the one thing that you don't want to do with clients, as much as you can, is make decisions for them. You want to give them their choices, so then that way when that choice goes wrong, you picked it. So even if it's not like there's not like a lot, like one of the choices is they leave and I call the cops, or you're still giving them choices, so you're not saying this is what we have to do. You're saying these are the options, what would you prefer? You'll get way further with people with that than with saying, this is what you're going to do there. I'm going to put you in the hospital. That's what we're going to do. So some of the times when maybe you wouldn't, where you maybe need to be firm, and you wouldn't necessarily be in a power struggle, and it has to fit your personality. So whenever you have a teacher or a mentor or something, remember that if you don't have the personality, what they do is probably not going to work for you. So you have to match that too. It's not just like, oh, that was cool, I want to do that. If that's not you, it's not going to, they'll feel it. So, for example, if someone's that's been hospitalized a lot is like, I'm going to kill myself, and then you ask them, do you have a plan? Oh, I don't know. I'm like, okay. Usually I've done this with people that I've hospitalized multiple times, so I'm like, okay, let's just like stop for like a couple seconds. You know what the kind of stuff we need to know. Because I've been there with your hospitalizations. So you know that I have to ask these questions. I'm not trying to be up in your business. I'm not trying to, ruin your day. I just have to do these specific things. And so I'd really appreciate if you could at least let me know, just so that we don't have to do this forever. Sometimes if you have, like I've had people where they're becoming very dangerous, and so I'll stop them and say, okay, if you do anything else, I'm calling the police, and this isn't a power struggle. It's that you are too dangerous at this point, and I don't want to get hurt, and I don't want you to get hurt. I've used that with kids, and usually they're like, oh, no, I don't want that. I'm like, okay, so you have choices. If you want to continue, that's fine, but this is what it's going to happen. And they're going to come down. What do you want to do? Do you want to go easy, or do you want to go hard? Your choice. And sometimes they'll pick hard. And then you're like, okay. And then you just know you call the police. You're like, okay, So, yeah. So those are some ways of maybe needing to be firm. Or if you start with trying to be empathic and connected, but it's not working. It's just becoming more and more mysterious, then you might have to get really firm. Like, okay, so this is what I need to know. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, so those are some helpful hints. We'll talk a little bit more as we go through. So we had this last week, but I deleted all the pieces that aren't. So again, welfare institution code, once danger to self or danger to other has occurred, we have no authorization we're not required to have release of information. So confidentiality no longer exists. Because again, if someone's like actively screaming and saying they're going to kill you, and like, well, could you sign this release of information before we take you? So those are just for you to have, the laws. Danger to self or others. So if someone is suicidal, we need to assess for safety and risk. And if we're unable to contract for safety and there's a clear plan and access to means, we would need to disclose confidential information. So initially, if they just say, I've been thinking about dying, we don't run to 5150. Like, it's really sad because there's some clients that their whole identities in that. They have tattoos of 5150. You see it a lot. You'd be surprised. When that's your identity, that's unfortunate because there's so much more than crises or symptomology or whatever. It's very like narrow who you think you are. That's kind of sad. So if someone just says, I've been thinking it'd be better if I was dead, we don't jump to 5150. You ask them more questions. What are some ways that you might ask people to get more information about their suicide or their homicidal ideations? How would you phrase it?
How long do you think this will?
Tell me more about that. You mentioned you feel hopeless. Tell me more about that. So maybe you're not even talking about the suicidality because those kind of lump together. So it'll come out. So open-ended questions. Because if you say something like, do you feel like you're going to kill yourself right now? You'll get someone that'll be like, nope. And then when they get hurt, they'll be like, you only ask me right now. I love it. All the time. If they come in and you do that, because I used to have it all the time, Friday, we have our last session. Do you want to hurt yourself? Nope. Come in Monday. How was your weekend? Oh, I attempted. Do you want to hurt yourself now? No. Okay, that's it. If you did in the past, that is unfortunate. We can talk about that, but you have to currently feel suicidal. What happens is people do that, and then the social worker's like, what? You lied. Yes, of course. Gosh. I remember some social workers, they would literally be trying to catch clients in lies. Yes. Like, hey, I caught them. Yeah, you probably catch them a lot. I don't know why we're doing any of this stuff. They lied. Oh my gosh. Oh no. So don't do that. But if they're not currently, you can't do anything about that. You might address it, like, hey, what do you think would have maybe helped you? Because it seemed like before we left for the weekend, you were okay and you had a safety plan. So what got in the way of you using it? That can be a helpful thing, but we're not going to then get into, how can I trust that you're being honest now? Because it happens all the time. We had thin walls, and I'd hear people do that, and I'm like, I'm going to have a hospitalization tonight, because they'll escalate the client until they actually do want to. There was one psychiatrist that I knew if certain clients saw her, that they were going to get 5150 after. Because she was so confrontational, so in your face, she would just push them to want to kill her. I mean, sometimes, I never verbalized it, but sometimes just talking to her, I kind of wanted to hurt her a little bit. So I was like, if I had like way less coping skills, maybe I'm high a little bit, like they're dangerous right there. And they have to have a clear plan, so you have to ask that. Don't ever like shy away with suicide. Like, I didn't know what to say. You ask, okay, you have thoughts. Yes, you want to kill yourself. How would you kill yourself? And if they're like, oh, I haven't thought about that, we're good. We still would want to do some more things. We're not just going to end it there. But they haven't thought enough to think about, oh, I would hang myself. I would shoot myself. I would. Mm-hmm.
So it has to be a clear plan, and they have to currently feel suicidal.
Mm-hmm. So if they previously did like 3 days ago, but right now, because everything's here and now. Same with danger to self, danger to other. Do you currently want to kill someone?
So we can explore like if it was like in the recent past, I guess, like you can explore it a little bit like in the current session, but if they don't feel that way now, you don't focus on it, right?
And so that's what happens a lot of times is social workers freak out, and so then they move the whole conversation just about that, and the person gets pissed off. They're like, I got a lot of other stuff to talk about. And they're like, oh, were you cutting? And then they just... When someone's cutting, the first thing you need to ask them is, are you trying to kill yourself? Or are you just coping with life? If they're coping with life, you don't hospitalize them. A lot of people do... people do stuff like get drunk every weekend. That's pretty reckless. So you want to clarify that. You don't want to automatically freak out, because I've seen psychiatrists. Oh, they cut. We need 5150 them. On what grounds? Like, there's nothing. They're saying, I do it when I get really stressed out. But yeah, you would ask them, and then you don't want to make everything about that, because then what happens usually is people aren't very confident, and so if you get someone that part of their way of avoiding doing therapy for themselves is to mess with you, you're just opening the doors. If they're currently saying, I have no plans, no means, I don't want to right now, you're good. You document that, so if they go home and do that, you can say, this is what they actually said in session. But sometimes when you start to get worried, for the people that are a little sadistic or want to move the session away from them to you, perfect outlet. Have you ever had someone that does that? Oh, I have. It's so fun. Oh, it seems like you're stressed right now. This is your session. I'm stressed every day. But they'll do that. Oh, I wonder if you're having personal issues in your life. Okay, again, your session. But that's when social workers, if they're not confident, then they're like, no, I'm fine. No, as soon as it starts, you're opening yourself up. You're like, here, shoot me, with all your stuff. We're not talking about me. Back to you. And you just keep doing it. At some point, someone will stop if you're not feeding them. The negative interactions that we have with clients is partially our fault. Unless they're super psychotic and whatever, and you couldn't do anything. But generally, it takes two to tango. So we start going back and forth, and then it becomes this don't do that for your own mental health. So, and then they have to have access to the means. So, if they're saying, I'm going to take all of my medicine, but they live in a boarding care where the medicine is locked away, we could keep assessing, but that's not going to happen. If they said, I've been cheeking my medicine and I have a stash in my room, then that could, and then that's when we would go. But you know what I mean? Clarify a little bit with people. How are you going to do that? Do you have those means? How did you get those? And then you want to see, is it feasible that you can do this? And again, always consult with supervisors, but don't just freak out if someone wants to hurt themselves or others, because it's very common. What you want to do, what I would recommend is think about what would be your plan when that happens, not if. And start to have a game plan so that your anxiety doesn't kick in and then you just start stumbling all over your words and you can't think. Think, okay, this is what I do first. And then I do this, and then I do that, and then I do this. So right off the bat, do you have ideations, plan, means? There's other ways, in some books there's 4 pieces that you look at. But for me, it's just ideations, plan, means. So that's the first thing. My first thing is, do you have the ideations? I'm not going to jump to all of them. Do you have ideation plan? They don't even know what that means, so that's not going to be helpful. Do you ever think about killing yourself? or killing someone else. Yeah, sometimes. Tell me about that. Oh, it's just nothing's going the way I want it to. And so sometimes I just think it'd be better if I was dead. Okay, so there's thoughts there. So how would you do it if you were going to kill yourself? Oh, I don't know. Or, I know. I would suffocate myself, and I would do this, and I would do this. Have you looked it up? Yeah, I've actually been on Google. I have a whole plan. But don't shy around that. Like, be very direct in your questions. And then, do you have what you need to do that? And they might say, well, no, I don't. So then you look at, okay, so then what do we need to do to keep you safe? And you want to see their willingness to stay safe. And then if they don't have it, then we move up the parameters. But of course, our first goal is to see, will you give it to me? I've had so many people. I used to have like a collection of knives and razor blades because they'd come in bleeding. I'm gonna slit my wrist. Will you give it to me? Okay. No more means. But people freak out. I remember one time a kid's like, they had a box cutter, and the social worker was just making it so bad. It was so horrible. Doing power plays. I'm gonna do this. Blah, blah, blah. So I come out and I'm like, hey, what's going on? Well, I'm gonna kill myself with a box cutter. Well, can I have your box cutter? Sure, come on. There you go. Thanks so much for giving that up. I really appreciate that. Okay. And the other person's there, seething. So you ask them, because a lot of people will. Especially, people that do really, grand public gestures, a lot of times it has to do with their pathology, and they'll give it up. A lot of times with, people that are really borderline, the way that, for me, that would help me identify that is if they did it very publicly. If you really want to die, you're not going to do it very publicly because you're in a mental health clinic. That's not going to come to the outcome that you want. So, sometimes you can ask, can I have that? They'll be totally fine. So, if someone does get involuntarily hospitalized, so you've gone through, they have a clear plan, a clear ideation, clear plan, clear means to hurt themselves or someone else, they won't go voluntarily. And if you take them voluntarily, from my understanding, and how we practice it, was once you drop them to the hospital, or if they're willing to go with a family member voluntarily, what you tell the family member is that if you leave here and they change their mind, call 911. So if they're like, yeah, I'll go, and grandma's like, I'll take you, then you give the family what they need in case that shifts, because that happens. They get in the car and they're like, screw that. I'm going to take you and me. So if they will go voluntarily and you take them, you just have to take them to the front, and that's it. Once they get to the front, because they're voluntarily agreeing to go, you're good. I have had people where I voluntarily taken them, and I'm just a little worried, and I'll stay. But that was more, they were clients I had. I kind of just, sometimes it's interesting because if someone wants to die and they'll go voluntarily, if the wait's too long, they're like, no, I'll just go home and kill myself. You're like, okay. The whole rest of your life will be over, or you wait 2 hours. I don't know which one. Obviously, it's the second. You just go home. So, if they won't go voluntarily, then we do involuntary hospitalization. So that is never number one go-to, is involuntary hospitalization. Ever. Because you still have to assess for all the plans, means, intent. You still have to see, are you willing to give up the knife, the pills? If not, will you go voluntarily because it sounds like you don't feel safe. And so if you go voluntarily, you can at least have people supporting you, monitoring you, so that maybe that won't happen. And one of the things that you have to be careful with is be careful what you talk about, because sometimes, Do you guys know about trauma? Have you guys had that trauma class yet? Okay, so I'll do like a really quick class. You'll be like, oh, we already learned this in a 10-minute teaching. So here's your brain. It looks like Donald Trump's hair a little bit too. It's funny. So here's your brain, and the lower parts of your brain are mainly, they're nonverbal. So that's why talking about trauma doesn't actually help people, because it's mainly stored in a nonverbal part. So your brain's a muscle. So with muscles, if you work them, they grow, right? And if you don't, they don't. So for people that have extensive trauma, all of these really primitive parts of their brain are like pumped up. The parts that have you have executive decisions, make rational thoughts, they are so weak because they're hardly ever used. So of course, when something happens, their brain automatically funnels it through fight or flight, and you don't always make the best decisions. So you want to kind of keep that in mind when you're working with people. Is their brain's not functioning like yours. So when you say, I don't know why they would do that, because you're not thinking about their brain. You're thinking about your brain. You wouldn't do that, but that doesn't mean they wouldn't. So this part is mainly connected with like the nervous system. And so that's why when people have a lot of trauma, they can smell something and their nervous system reacts because it starts to provide all of the simulation of the trauma. And that's why when that starts to happen, just saying, don't think about it, it's just not an effective, they don't have control at that point. So when someone's suicidal, you have to be careful because sometimes what people do is they start to move them to the memories and the thoughts of the things that make them want to kill themselves. And they make them want to kill themselves more. So, I want to die because I don't have anyone. So you're so lonely. Yes, I am. Wow, that must be really hard. That could work, but it could make them get way more suicidal. Because they're like, I have nothing to live for. One of the things that sometimes, and you try it and you see what happens. You don't want to spend too much time on the material that they're, because you may say, but I'm a therapist. Crisis is not a time for therapy. Ever. Crisis is a time to stabilize. And so some of your clients that you'll have, they are so in crisis all the time, therapy is not going to happen. Your whole intervention is stabilizing them, teaching them how to cope, teaching them how to ground, teaching them how to breathe. If you do the other stuff, it's not going to be effective and it will trigger them. So it's just like silly at that point. So what you can do is move the conversation away. So if someone's getting really escalated, they're very focused on, I'm going to kill my girlfriend because she cheated on me. I'm going to bring up other stuff. Like, oh man, it's cloudy today. Did you notice that? They might say, fuck you, but it makes their brain at least move to, is it cloudy? Yeah, it's cloudy. So you're starting to break the continuum, because otherwise it's just this like spinning cycle. So you want to just start putting little things into it to make it start to slow down a little bit. Or like, oh, I really like your shoes. They're really great. Where'd you get them? Well, I know, but like, where'd you get them? Oh, I got them at Vans store. Oh, cool. Do you like Vans? Yeah, they're all right. You start to move it to something else. They have a sports shirt on. Oh, you like the Raiders? Or I don't know anything about sports, but if you do, then you can know whatever the opposite team that like hates them. You can just be like, so you like this one? They're like, no! Like, tell me more about that. It starts to get them to calm down and to think about something else. You can say deep breaths. It's a little tricky. Usually, if it's ever worked, I do it with them. I'm like, okay, let's do it. So I'm going to breathe in really deep, breathe out. You try to distract them from whatever is building them up as much as possible. Mm-hmm.
Would this also work for anger? Like someone's
Super depressed. With all of our bad mental habits, it's a very active process to maintain our bad mental habits because we have to exaggerate. And we have to fixate and we have to forget everything that's good about whatever the thing is. So it's not like our feelings just hit us. We are like very strongly actively participating. So if we're mad about something, what do? So like let's say you get mad at me today. You're going to remember every time I made a mistake. Because it's not going to help to think of me as competent because you want to hate me, right? So you're not going to think, oh, well, one time he was really... Nope, you're going to think about that time that I didn't respond to your email, or the time that there's all kinds of spelling errors, like this person can barely spell, which is very true. You're going to start exaggerating because you can't maintain the continuum of a mind like that without exaggeration. And if someone comes in and says, oh, like say they're... Professor Ricardio's so cool. You know I'm talking to them. You're going to leave them? No. You're obviously an idiot. You go. So people don't realize that with sadness, anxiety, anger, they have a very active role. And so trying to get people to get distracted can be helpful. Because they're telling a story and then it's just building and building and building and building. So when someone wants to kill someone or kill themselves, they're exaggerating. My life has nothing. I have nothing to live for. Whatever friends I have, they don't really like me. Remember that one time, I think you guys are too young, but with MySpace, remember when they moved me from the number 1 to number 4? Like, they have to do that. So what you need to do is get them on something else. Not talk about the person they want to kill. Once you know their identifiable information, shift the conversation. Because what you're going to do is make them become more and more angry. I'm going to freaking leave right now and kill them. Don't do that. Anyone in crisis, especially danger to yourself or others, throw out random stuff. Start whispering. That's what I did a lot when people were like danger to others mainly. They'd come up, and they'd be screaming in the front, and I'd come up, and they'd be like, well, hi. What? Oh, I just asked you how. What? And then they start squinting, and their mind shifts, and then I'm like, oh, sorry, could you not hear me? Or I just talk really low. They come in, I'm going to fucking kill you. And oh, that's unfortunate. What? Well, I kind of wanted to live. But you start talking small. And when someone is really agitated, get small. Don't get big. Because you are challenging them. When someone is really, like, danger to other, I'm not even giving them eye contact anymore. Because that is a challenge. They're looking at me, I'm like, Stevie Wonder. Get really small, make your voice get small, you physically get small, don't stand like this, start being like that. Because if you're a challenge, it's just going to escalate them more. Because there's, again, this part is functioning, and this part is fight or flight, I'm going to die. It's not like, well, I've got a vacation later, it's like, this is happening, what am I going to do? So, get quiet, stay small. There are times when you do need to be firm, but you need to like kind of try the other stuff first. And it depends on your relationship with the person. If you don't know someone, so you're just like crisis response, you just need to stay safe. That's your focus. You have a tool set, like you're going to, clarify, do they have, plan, means, intent. You're also going to maybe try to distract them. If it doesn't work, move on to the next skill. Like you need a whole tool set of what you use when someone is coming at you or is like really in crisis. So I'll do this because I think we'll have time. So these are LEAP. So if you take Recovering Behavioral Health, which is online, but it's one that I teach, I do a little bit of LEAP. And I tried to weave it in. So there's 4 tools, but we're only going to do 1 tool because no one can understand it usually. So there's so this tool set of skills is not saying that anything else is wrong, but you need different tools for different things, right? So like Monday, Sunday night I came home from San Francisco, and my hose was just running, like you couldn't turn it off. So I'm not going to get a hammer, right? That's not, I need to like turn my water off. So you have to think of all of the clinical things you learn as tools. There's not one that's perfect for everything. Don't get into that habit. You always see people like that. Oh, everyone needs blah, blah. No, they don't. Maybe they don't. Maybe you need that, and so you need to go get some help. So they're all tools, and they don't necessarily invalidate the other ones, but it's learning when to use it. So with LEAP, and it's just LEAP, there's LEAP Foundation. They do trainings. They're fantastic. They're so simple, but not very easy. So the first tool is reflective listening. So what are we normally taught about reflective listening? What do you guys know?
Like the summarize, reframe, receipt.
So this is not, so this, yes. So LEAP reflective listening is not like motivation interviewing reflective listening. You are not summarizing unless it's verbatim. You're not adding empathy at all. So I'll give you, who wants to try? Probably no one. I did it when I did the training. I was the first to, and I failed miserably. So be okay with that. It actually took 17 therapists, and he kept telling us the same thing, and we could not do it because we're so wired to be like, oh, that sounds hard. So I'll give you the example, and you guys can try. And if no one does it, then I'll just tell you what happened. So this is the example he gave. He said, reflect this. So this is one of his clients. So I was the first victim. So he says, I'm the client, the guy. I am not fucking mentally ill. I don't need that fucking medicine. And if you really want to help me, you help me with my neighbors upstairs because every time they flush the toilet, they're talking to the FBI and planning to murder me. So if you really want to help me, that's what you need to do. So how would you reflect that?
So your neighbors are planning to murder you.
Pretty good. That's actually pretty good. That's pretty good. So one of the main pieces is you say, let me make sure I'm understanding you correctly.
Isn't that mental?
Nope. It's just factual. Let me make sure I'm hearing you correctly. Because what you're communicating is I'm listening. So I want to make sure.
Isn't that summarizing them?
We'll get to that. So you don't add anything that they did not say. So I'll tell you what I did. This is the first time. Total failure. I said, okay, so it sounds like you don't think you're mentally ill, and you have some safety issues going on with your neighbors. And if I want to help you, that's what I would address. And he's like, absolutely incorrect. So the first thing is I said, it sounds like you don't think you're mentally ill. So what does that say? I think you're mentally ill. So you don't say that. You say, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're not mentally ill. Not you think that you're not mentally ill, or you think you don't need medicine. If I'm hearing you correctly, you don't need that fucking medicine. That is actually probably more helpful to say what they literally said. Yeah, I don't. Doesn't mean you're agreeing with them. I can't do that, then they'll think that. No. So if someone comes in and they say, I have nothing to live for, and again, this doesn't mean this is the only tool, but it is a very powerful tool. I have nothing to live for, I'm just going to end it all. Let me make sure I'm understanding you right. You have nothing to live for. Is that correct? Yeah, what we normally want to do is, you have a lot to live for. I'm sure there are people that love you. What if there isn't? That totally, I've had people say no one does. And then when I work with them long enough, I'm like, that's really true. Like, no one actually loves them. They burned every bridge. So then he said, and then you said you have safety issues. He thinks his neighbors are going to murder him. And you just minimize it to safety issues. I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. They're going to be murdered. And I'm like, safety issues. So those are natural things that people do that are not effective given this perspective. And so when someone's coming in, I'm going to kill this person, then you're just going, you're literally saying what they said. And which is, it sounds easy, but like that people could not do it. He'd literally say, stop doing that. And the next person would be like, okay, so it sounds like you're having a rough time. And he's just like, no. So you say, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying blah, 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 blah. Verbatim. Don't add words. Don't highlight certain words. Because what happens when you do that is you send a message because you think something's important, but maybe that wasn't the most important part of their message. And so now you've ruined that relationship because they're like, you're stupid. You don't even care about what my problem is. You highlighted the part about my medicine, and the real problem is that my neighbors want to kill me. So try that. It's hard. I teach it to families when I do family therapy, and they almost can never do it. Because either they're too empathic, so they want to have all this empathy, or they just feel it's weird. That's weird. So it's weird to listen to someone and say, if I'm hearing you right, this is what you said. Yes. Okay, so that probably shows why we have such bad communication. Because what's the point of communication? To get your message across. Uh-huh.
It almost takes away all the therapist bias.
Mm-hmm.
Literally and barely.
And you're not adding anything. You're showing that they're the expert. Because that's one of the mistakes that we make is we want to come in and be like, oh, I've seen this many times. And then they're not special. When someone wants to kill themselves or others, or just is in trouble, you want to feel special, right? Like, my anger is the worst anger that's ever been. So don't do that. You don't need to tell them, yes, your anger is the worst, but don't minimize their experience because they want to die. They want to kill someone. That's difficult to feel that way. If you haven't, it helps if you ever have. And I'm not saying that like jokingly, like if you've ever been suicidal or felt homicidal, because you understand then how intense that is and how uncomfortable it is. And so then you can have a lot more compassion for them. If you don't, if you never felt that way, then it's kind of like, why would you think like that? That's not relevant right now. We just need to get you calmed down. We need to get you in the hospital or in a safety plan or whatever. So, yes. So for them to want to harm others, if they have an identifiable victim, then we need to contact law enforcement and the victim. That's the Tarasoff legislation. Tarasoff, that case, if you go into different states, they interpret it differently. So in California, that's what we do. But if you move to like Alabama, they might have only included parts of Tarasoff, not the whole thing. But if someone has an identifiable victim, they say, I'm going to kill Professor Ricadio. You know who that is. You contact law enforcement and the victim. You do your best. Obviously, sometimes you can't find people. But you document all attempts. A lot of times it's usually someone close to them, so you have that like emergency contacts, you know like where they live. Like there's ways to figure it out. So again, we already went over that, but just ideas, thoughts, plan, means. Those are the components that we need to consider. If they do, our first thing is to say, will they agree to a safety plan? Will they hand over the means? Will they participate in a no-harm contract? A safety plan and no-harm contract does not always protect you, so we'll talk about that. They only go so far. Because you could just say a lot of stuff and not do it. Mm-hmm.
I've heard no harm contracts can actually do more harm than good. And so like they were starting to be ruled out for phase.
Well, if you get a no-harm contract, that is not sufficient to cover you legally. Sometimes it can start a conversation, but it's not enough. Someone can say that. You still have to assess and so they're really not, but some people really like them. One of the helpful things that you should probably do if you're working with someone is you start planning a safety plan first session. Because what therapists or social workers tend to do is they think about coping and safety plans when they want to kill themselves. They're absolutely not effective. Nothing is as effective as maladaptive patterns. The whole point of safety plans coping is to help you identify it before it gets to that point. Once you're there, it's irrelevant. Don't, let's do deep breaths. You're not going to be breathing soon if you tell them that. Like, that's not going to work too well. So, if they only have thoughts, you don't just end there. So you're not like, oh, okay, cool, let's keep going. Anytime someone has thoughts, I say, okay, let's plan for if you ever felt like you wanted to do more. So they're starting a safety plan. They don't have a plan, they don't have means. This is not required, but this is what I would suggest you do with people. So whenever I go, do you ever want to hurt yourself? No. Because usually you can feel it and you know that that's not true. So okay, so that's great. You don't have thoughts now, but what would you do if you did? Who could help you? What helps you when you feel like that? Where would you go? Do you know where to go? Who could you contact? You start to have those conversations. What do you think might be a situation that would make you get to that point where you feel like that? You're intervening quite effectively, and you're having them start to think about that. And it's very helpful when you know that they're really just full of crap, because you can't do anything about that, but you've now had a discussion with them. What would you do? Who would you talk to? Because usually when people feel suicidal or homicidal, they feel like there's no other options. That's part of the mindset. And so if you're having a conversation, they know what to say and what not to say. Because you'll meet someone like that where you're like, I don't believe you when you say you don't have thoughts. But you can't do like citizen's arrest. So then you go into, what if you did? Because life's hard. It never goes as planned. So let's say everything falls apart. What would you do if you wanted to kill yourself? Not that. And they're like, oh, and then they tell you the plan. And you're like, ha, I got you. What could you do to take care of yourself? Who could you call? Who's important in your life? Who would you miss? Who would miss you if you were not here? Again, you're distracting them again, because the exaggeration is no one will care, no one whatever, but now you're starting to have that conversation of who would miss you and why, and it starts to make them think about that. If they say no one, then this is why you need like a lot of tools in your toolbox, because you might get someone that says no one. And then you got to have another one. You can't just say, oh, that's all I got. I have to call the police now. And yeah, if you can take the means, then usually you're safe. You still want to talk to them though and say, if I take this knife, are you going to be safe today? Do you have another knife at home? Do you have anything that's sharp at home that you might use? And a lot of times they'll tell you, like, yeah, like kids that cut, they can get the pencil sharpeners. That's a razor blade. So you take it and like, do you have anything else? Well, we always have pencil sharpeners. I'm like, damn those pencil sharpeners. Will you willingly give it up? And if they say yeah, and they're like, yeah, and you feel like, yeah, they're like, then you tell the caregiver, whoever, this is the plan if things change, because they probably will. So you need to clearly have them like, here's CCRT's number, Community Crisis Response Team in San Bernardino County, 24 hours. Make sure that if you give clients CCRT, because they're kind of tricky, because I've called on the weekend, they make it sound like they're not open. So if I wouldn't have known, I wouldn't have put my number in to get called back, and I didn't, and call me back. But the way they made it sound is like, this Monday through Friday, we're open, blah, blah, blah. No mention of holidays, middle of the night. So inform someone that. Like when you give resources, you need to also know how they're going to manage it, because sometimes the resources are like very insurmountable. Like I remember the first time I called CCRT, I'm like, this is some shady stuff. Because if I was a regular person, I would just assume they don't come out on the weekends and holidays, and I know they do. I wouldn't leave my number, because it didn't sound like, here, leave your number. It's like, oh, go to the hospital. So have them have those resources. Also, one thing that is good in this area is they have, it's called Windsor. It's over, do you guys know where the juvenile, I think it's Gilbert. It's where the CFS court is and probation. Juvie's there too, actually. It's like CFS court, and then there's like razor wires, and then there's the juvie. There's a mental health clinic called Phoenix. So in the corner, so let's say this is my very accurate map. Is it Gilbert? Is that
Gilbert's were like probation, public defender, gateway programs, family law.
Gilbert is dependency court. We have dependency court, juvenile.
that's on Gilbert? What's the cross? Do you remember?
Waterman.
Okay. Okay. So there's like a little school here, and then there's like CFS court, and then there's like razor wires, and that's where juvenile hall is, and then there's a mental health clinic here, there's a TAY one-stop center here. So across the street, they built Windsor. Windsor it's kind of like Spanish style. It's pretty cool. Windsor is a place where you can stay for 23 hours and 59 minutes. Once it's 24, then they have to either put you on a hold and you have to go to the hospital. So it's a voluntary place where you can go when you're in crisis, and they have like quiet rooms, they have staff, therapists, all kinds of stuff. It's great. Always encourage or try to get people to do this because we never want highest level of care unless it's required. It's always like least restrictive. So Windsor is fantastic. I've taken a lot of kids to Windsor. You have to stay with them, but it's voluntary. And so if they decide, after 10 minutes, I'm cool now, they can go home. And they can go back if that's the case. And you can get resources and get all kinds of stuff. So it's a great place. A lot of people don't know about it. And so that, again, for this county specific, that might be part of your plan for danger to self or others. First, will they give us the means? Will they go to Windsor? Will they go involuntarily to an inpatient unit? Any ER can do holds, but it's generally easier to take them directly to an inpatient unit because it's quicker. Do you guys know where the inpatient units are around here?
Isn't one Fontana or something?
Yes.
ARC, DMC.
So ARMC's in Colton, Rialto, it's like on the border. And so the ARMC, so it's Arrowhead Regional Medical Center. So the hospital's like here, and then off to the corner is the BI, or the BH, Behavioral Health. So with this one, there's this cute little like cul-de-sac, and then they have a door that they ring. So they can go through the ER, but I would take someone directly to there if they're willing to go voluntarily. BMC, you guys know where that is, right? It's right up the street from here. For children, ARMC won't do anything with children. They can put them on a hold, but they'll stay in a hospital bed, and they won't actually go to a psychiatric inpatient unless there's beds open. So BMC, Canyon Ridge, which is in Chino. I think it's Oak Grove and Covina. Aurora. Is there Oak something?
Used to be Charter Oak Hospital.
Charter Oak. So Charter. Oh, is that what Aurora is now? Okay. So those are the only ones that take kids. And BMC just cut like half their kid beds. So what happens a lot of times when you're working with youth that need to be put on holds is they get put on a hold and then they sit in an ER bed for 3 days and they're released. Sometimes they'll release them right away. I've had kids where they put them on a hold, we get a call from the ER 2 hours later, oh, they're good now. And you're like, seriously? Like the point of going on a hold is to actually get help. With adults, there's lots. Like Redlands Community has one. You go through the ER though, it's like on the 5th floor. ARMC, Kaiser sends you somewhere. So if they're Kaiser and they go to their Kaiser ER, they would then go somewhere else for a hold. So it's helpful to kind of navigate those things and know where they are, especially with kids, because if you show up to ARMC I mean, they might. I don't know what they would do because they don't take kids. They don't kid beds. And then if you work with someone who has medical health issues, a lot of times they have to be medically cleared before they can actually go inpatient. So that's just some fun information. Let's see. So we already went over this part. So if they don't agree with giving us the means and they have a clear plan, ideation means, then we would look at voluntary hospitalization, and then second, non-voluntary hospitalization, 5150. What we would want to do in terms of our follow-up, so if someone, if you're working with a client and they get hospitalized, you want to increase contacts between sessions. So I worked with a peer once that they're like a pretty serious attempt, and it had been a month and they still didn't talk to them. Yeah, that's when I lost my mind. It wasn't very professional. They're like, well, I'm busy. I'm like, they tried to actually kill themselves, so I think it's okay. You want to increase social supports, refer them to a psychiatrist if they're not already seeing one, because maybe medication does need to be at least looked at. If they do have a psychiatrist, you want to refer them back. A lot of times when people get hospitalized, they don't go back to the psychiatrist, they don't mention it, and there's not like a way that they know. Like in San Bernardino County, there is a way to tell if you've been hospitalized within San Bernardino County, but I don't think it's common that people are just going to go look in there. So you want to encourage someone, if they get hospitalized, go to your doctor, tell them you got hospitalized for danger self, danger to other. Because they won't sometimes. They're like, well, they just asked me how I was doing and I'm fine. Because for someone that gets hospitalized a lot, they are fine. They're like, oh yeah, I just wanted to kill someone yesterday, but I'm fine. Consult to make sure that we're doing everything that we can, and then document all your efforts. So if you have a high-risk client, someone that's recently been hospitalized, or is just having ideations, make sure that you are documenting everything that you're doing. Their coping plans, what they're telling you in session, what you've done, collaterals that you've done. If someone's really high risk, I mean, someone could not want to have collaterals, but it's really important to connect with the systems that support the client. Sometimes they don't know. Like where they live, no one knows they're suicidal. They're just telling you only. So with danger to others, we have a duty to protect the potential victim from the client's violence. Tarasoff is where this originated. So what is considered a credible source? Because what if you have someone's best friend comes into the clinic and is like, they're saying this. So for us, that's not actually. From my understanding, for us, it's immediate family is credible source. This didn't have that in there, but I don't think I knew that at that point. So third party immediate family. If it's like second cousin, you can still like investigate or like try to find out more information, but you're not like legally required, because it could be like an angry neighbor that comes in and like, my neighbor, is planning to kill everyone or something like that. We contact law enforcement and the victim. If they want to shoot up a school or public setting, how do we contact the potential victims? If it's a school, we contact the school and let them know. If it's a location like Dodger Stadium, the mall, we contact and try to get a hold of security and say, this person is saying that they are going to come and kill everyone in